Thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Maybe I should say transportate. Should I say transport or transportation? Since the whole point of this is that, so I used to live in New York City. I lived in the city between 2006 when I was 18 and 2011 when I was 23. And the thing is, since leaving, I visited the city, I believe every single year with the exception of the corona years of 2020, 2021. At least once, people at the immigration line asked me why I visit so often. And so, even though I was technically a tourist, the kind of formal definition of a tourist is someone who visits a city, who visits the city while not living there, or in the region. I didn't really identify as an outsider, but kind of at this point I do, and I think it's mostly, I don't know if it's mostly, it's a combo, I guess, of the more than 2 years in which I was not in the city because of Corona. Also, I've been a lot more social with people in Berlin than I was in Paris or even in Stockholm. And that, I guess maybe it got to point. Yeah. And it got to the point of me kind of, I don't know if Europeanizing is the right word for this, because it's something that I started feeling certainly when I knew I wasn't going to get into academia and I needed to freelance and talk about public transit. So that would have been more than 6 years ago when I was in Paris, not Berlin. But I guess all of those things combined, plus I guess some real changes in the city in the last couple of years, have made me maybe feel more like an outsider. And I don't mean an outsider in the kind of most conventional sense, right? I mean, I walk in New York at a New Yorker speed, right? I mean, in New York, you're supposed to maintain something like 6-ish kilometers an hour of walking speed, or people consider you a tourist. And so things like that, like I walk fast and I know the subway. It's just that I guess I've gotten used to certain Europeanisms, and I kind of want to talk about how New York compares, and I'm specifically going to talk about issues of public transport. I'm not going to talk about other random things. I don't know, daycare or things that I've been hearing from, let's say, colleagues who have children. It's very specific to public transportation. I'm going to talk about related issues from time to time, but the thing that most strikes me is the low frequency and the low reliability. So I'm not on Twitter anymore, as I think everyone knows. I'm very ostentatiously not on Twitter, and I still probably post more than the average user on Twitter because I do post links to all of my blog posts and all of my streams. And I think also all every time I upload on YouTube, I think I tweet that. But so when I was on Twitter compulsively, I don't know which of you guys were reading me then, but I would constantly post these pics of countdown clocks and how long the intervals between the trains were. And they were pretty horrific. I mean, they still are. It's just that they don't post them as much anymore because I do that on Mastodon from time to time. It's just that on Mastodon the MTA is not there, and so I mean, not a lot of people are going to see it, unfortunately. And so for example, the trains run every 12 minutes. Not like all day. I mean, at rush hour they run more, but on weekends. So I'm gonna use my most trustworthy tool for streaming, which is Google Earth, and I'm going to show you where I'm staying at the hotel. Like, not the literal hotel. Like, I'm not going to self-dox that much, but I'm going to show you which neighborhood I've been staying in, which is Long Island City / Queensbridge. So, not about high-speed rail. Let's not do Crayon. And if you want to see Crayon, literally that was my previous video. And which is on YouTube. And so the hotels tend to cluster around here. And again, I'm not gonna tell you which exact hotel, but it's roughly this area. So I'm generally on the so generally this is my has been my home station, both this trip, previous trip, I think also the one before it. Yeah, also the one before it, and so it's the F train. The F train does run every 12 hours during weekends, which is terrible. Weekday off peak, I don't remember. Maybe 8 minutes. Again, I don't remember. I tend to generally be luckier with my arrival times, and it's pretty random, but I don't usually see these 12-minute waits. I somehow get to the station, I see a 3-minute wait, and then I see the countdown clock says that behind us it's a 15-minute wait or something. But yeah, so the waits are just very long. Now, to be very clear, this is either one or two stops outside Manhattan, right? Because Roosevelt Island is legally part of Manhattan, even though its only connection with the rest of the city, I mean, there's the subway, but the only surface connection with the rest of the city goes via Queens. So it's your call whether Queensbridge is the first or second stop outside Manhattan. But this is pretty close to the center. You go Roosevelt Island, 63rd, and 57th, and 57th is already in the Midtown core. This should not be a train every 12 minutes. This should be, I mean, part of it is the 6-minute service campaign. It should be a train every 6 minutes, all day, every day. I mean, maybe not overnight or anything like that, but certainly at 8, 9 in the evening, yeah, a train every 6 minutes. And on weekends, during the day, a train every 6 minutes. The thing is, this is a pretty high density area. I don't know how visible it is on census information, because again, this is such a cluster of hotels around here that a lot of the people here are not visible to the census because they are not residents. But I mean, why are the hotels here? Why does someone open a hotel in Long Island City rather than literally anywhere else? It's because of the proximity to Manhattan. So in addition to the many people who live in Queensbridge houses, or with the longer walk Dutch Kills, and the smaller buildings around this area, there is a large number of tourists who also take the trains, and no, every 12 minutes, not every 12 hours, not every 12 hours. It's every 12 minutes. And so this frequency, it's just horrific when the interval between the trains is potentially longer than the one-way trip time on the train, right? Because if I'm taking the train from Queensbridge to, let's say, Rockefeller Center, it's not a 12-minute trip. It is shorter. And I think Rockefeller Center is the busiest stop on this. I don't know because the reported stops are by the entire stop and not by line. The busiest subway station that has F service is 34th Street Herald Square. It's the third busiest in the city. I believe just on the F it's 50th. This is, I think, maybe 8 minutes. So the trains should definitely not come every 12. It meaningfully reduces ridership. And maybe it's something that I was used to from years of living in the city and visiting so often. Also, I lived in Manhattan, but I was visiting often places like Long Island City, parts of Brooklyn where I was getting crash space. Maybe I just don't remember that very much, or maybe I happen to be at transfer stations, like let's say Queensboro Plaza. Queensboro Plaza maybe is more pleasant, just because Queensboro Plaza, there's the 7 and W. The 7 is more frequent, the NW are not, but it's 2 trains on one. I mean, the W's are on weekends, but on weekday off peaks at least. So it's just the shock of how long I need to wait for the trains, and this is something where I've kind of been trained that I shouldn't ever need to do that. And this is not just Berlin. I'm not sure about Stockholm, but Berlin is either the worst or the second worst of the cities that I've lived in this since I left the United States, because Vancouver has driverless trains that are very frequent. Now, I wasn't on the driverless trains because the driverless trains don't have a lot of coverage. Specifically, they don't have coverage of the west side, where I lived and where I was taking the bus to the university. But when I did use the trains, unless I was going far out, it was 3 minute wait, 4 minute wait. I mean, the gaming meetups were often far out, but the but if I was going anywhere else, yeah. People don't know Vancouver. Vancouver has 3 trunk lines on SkyTrains, not SkyTrains, SkyTrain. These are the Expo line, which goes diagonally from downtown to the southeast through New Westminster to Surrey. It is the oldest, cheapest to have been built because it reuses the pre-existing right-of-way for an interurban and a freight rail tunnel here. And it's had extensive transit-oriented development, the best in North America by a margin, in Metrotone and New West, and also this part of Surrey. And then there's the Millennium Line, which goes east-west, elevated over Lougheed Highway, and it wends its way toward Coquitlam. And it kind of should go all the way to UBC, but it only goes as far as just past the intersection with the Expo line. They're slowly extending it. They are in the process of extending it halfway to UBC, and then they're looking for money to extend it fully to UBC. So this is what I would have been using if this were in place in 2012, rather than currently planning, I think, late 2020s, early 2030s for everything. And then there's the Canada line, which goes north-south, downtown to the airport and Richmond. All of these are driverless, very free. It's the system of short, very frequent trains on systems that were built driverless from the start, like the Copenhagen Metro or the newer lines built in Milan and Torino. Then I was in Stockholm, which is not driverless and is branched. I don't know. I think where I was living, it was usually 5 minute waits on a branch. Paris, 3 minute trains usually. Berlin is 5 minutes. So I've gotten used to trains actually coming, and then I say New York that the trains come every 12 minutes, and this is not a reliable. Oh, you. So my understanding is that the Canadian New York is not Vancouver but Toronto. Now, I don't know Toronto nearly so well as I know Vancouver. I never lived there. I visited it once 22 years ago as a tourist, unless you count visiting a partner in Mississauga, but even that was 17 years ago. There's no attendant. There are no platform screen doors. There's no attendant. They keep saying they should have built platform screen doors, but they didn't. And yes, it's the same system. The Expo and Millennium lines in Vancouver are the same system as the JFK AirTrain. The Canada line is a different system. I don't remember if it's the same system as the Copenhagen Metro. I mean, LA without being terminally car-pilled is not LA. Like, a fundamental fact about LA, and that goes 100 years back already, more than 100 years, maybe 105 years or something like that, is that LA is a city of cars. This is something that was there already at the end of World War I. Yeah, it also had the Pacific Electric, so people keep rewriting history in which Los Angeles used to have good public transportation. No, it didn't. This... Oh, yeah. Oh, industry-wise. Yeah, so industry... Yeah, industry-wise, I don't think anything in Canada is like New York. And the reason is that New York is a specialized city to finance and other professional services. Now, it does also get other industries that are not professional services, but are extremely high value added that locate there because... I shouldn't say there, I'm here right now. They locate here because... I've never... Steffi, I've never seen this. You can. It's like the Canadian West Coast, the Canadian version of the American West Coast. Although the Vancouverites I mentioned not in Netherlands, the Canadians that I met in Vancouver objected to this and viewed themselves as superior to the Seattleites, Portlanders, and San Franciscans on, for example, environmental matters. The other thing is, for example, San Francisco is defined by being is defined by being extremely tech wealthy. Vancouver is not. Vancouver is not a wealthy city. It's one of those things that's very easy to miss, and it's the same thing with Berlin. Berlin is not a wealthy city. Berlin is the largest single core city within Germany, one of the largest in Europe. I think it goes in the EU, let's say. It would be Paris, then Madrid, and I think it's then Berlin. But Berlin is not wealthy. Vancouver is something similar in that Vancouver is very skyscraper-y. And there's aggressive construction there due to high levels of immigration in its construction, and because the immigration levels are so high, the very high construction rates keep Vancouver affordable by New York standards, LA standards, San Francisco standards, Boston standards, but not by Texas standards. No, there's no street running. There's no street running in Vancouver. But also the LRT lines in LA have street running, but very little, and the Green Line, I don't remember if the Green Line as originally built was entirely grade separated. It just ran LRVs. There are plans to extend it to El Segundo that may involve street running. I don't remember if they've already done that or not. So anyway, New York is a city of professional services. Now again, it does have a tech industry. The Google building in New York is, I believe, their largest office outside the Bay Area. Remember, Pfizer is headquartered in New York. New York is not just a city that only provides professional services to other people. Because of its role in providing professional services to other people, it's also attracted, again, these very high value added industries. So it's kind of the second office of a lot of tech firms. Again, there's biotech here. But Toronto is very different in that the Toronto region, for example, has a lot of manufacturing. But even then, Toronto is a lot of professional services. So in some sense, Toronto can be viewed as the Canadian New York. Vancouver, again, is different. It's much smaller, very skyscraper-y, so people assume that is a very wealthy city. Again, it is not. I mean, it's wealthy because it's a major first world city, but it's not wealthy in the way that Munich, Stockholm, Paris, London, New York, Boston, San Francisco are wealthy. Anyway, Vancouver, so Vancouver is just its own thing, but in New York, the thing is, the frequency is just not good. It is grade separated in New York, and it is long trains. So this is an inherited legacy subway system, which is exactly the same as where I live. Berlin, again, is probably the number 2 city in the world behind New York in unrealized subway expansion plans. And unfortunately, by the way, the most important thing for LA is to expand the reach within the city core. It matters. It's helpful to build subways and not light rail, but in LA they should be building just more lines in the city core. So subway to the sea, not just Wilshire to UCLA, but all the way to Santa Monica. Extend the Crenshaw line, but not just Crenshaw, but keep going north toward Hollywood, like on Western or something. Build the Pink Line or something like the Pink Line that doesn't reverse branch. Like, they need a bunch of core stuff in LA. And they keep not building core stuff in LA for reasons that are grossly off topic for this video. So the annoying thing is, it's not, let's say, a clock-face timetable every 12 minutes. Speaking of Vancouver, as I said, I did not ride SkyTrain to work in Vancouver. I rode it very often, but not every day. More like, I don't know, twice a week or something. And this was because I took a bus to work. The bus was not the Broadway buses that pretend to be BRT, and I say pretend because they have other BRT treatments, but not dedicated lanes. So no, they're not BRT. They're just the bus. And likewise, here on Fourth Avenue, I rode what is just the bus. But it was a limited stop bus. We lived right next to the limited stop, so it was a fast trip. No dedicated lanes, but the traffic system in Vancouver kind of privileges traffic on these east-west arterials over opposing traffic. The bus came on a 12-minute clock face timetable. So my first year I taught rush hour, at 10 in the morning, which was still short as rush hour. Second year in Vancouver, I taught a class at 2 in the afternoon, both semesters. I did not go to the office unless I needed to, because my office was terrible. And so I would not go to the office in the morning and then go to class. I would go specifically to campus specifically for class. So the bus, the express buses on 4th Ave came on a 12-minute tucked off peak, 1 minute after the hour. So I needed to get on a bus that would arrive at 101, 113, 125, 137, 149. 149 makes me miss my own class. 137 is the last bus that makes me make my own class, and I always made sure to time myself to ideally the 113, maybe the 125, so that if I missed it, I could take the next bus. This is something that I'm describing that happened 9 years ago, and I still remember that tucked. It was reliable. It was not, you could not set your watch to it or anything that fancy, but the bus was supposed to come, let's say, at 1:13. I don't remember ever having shown up at 1:13 and seeing the bus having just left early. Sometimes I was late by a minute, but again, I timed myself so that it would be resilient to me being late by a minute. The bus would show up sometime between 1:13 and 1:15. 1:16, I think, was pretty rare. So pretty reliable, and this is on a mixed traffic bus, although again on a street network where this specific arterial in the same sort of Broadway had unusually smooth flowing traffic for an arterial in a dense city. If for some reason people want that aside, I can go into why, because Jarrett Walker explained this to me a couple years ago, and it's beautiful. In New York, the 12 minutes, at any rate, are not on any kind of tucked. In New York, the 12 minutes are the trains will come whenever. They will be constantly delayed. There is train traffic ahead of us. Please be patient, or we are being delayed by the train's dispatcher. So 12 minutes is a round number because it's 5 in an hour. How many European non-expressives would qualify for American BRT criteria? Well, in America, BRT has been defined down to being any bus that is considered worthy of being ridden by people who are not poor. So it's not ever about standards, because, for example, let's say that the standard for BRT is it has significant physical separation of lanes. It can be open BRT, so there is significant physical separation of lanes, but then the bus goes somewhere else. But then the bus branches off to a place where it's in mixed traffic. That's probably the only correct way to run BRT in a country with even mildly first world wages. So let's call them Greek wages or Turkish wages as opposed to Brazilian ones. The problem is, by that standard, the United States has had a BRT line since, I think, 1949, because in Providence there is a former streetcar tunnel, which I'm going to look... So Providence has two tunnels, two mass transit tunnels, of which one was a historic rail tunnel that I will not be able to find for you right now. I think this was the portal. And then the outer portal of that is here. Sometimes I cry on restoring it, but... Crayon. There's the one that is actually in use. It was a streetcar tunnel that was bustituted in, I believe, 1949, making it the first BRT by any kind of physical separation standards in America, possibly the world. The upper terminal is here. It's between, it is on Thayer Street between, yeah, it's here. So you see how the buses come out of a tunnel right here? This is a bus tunnel, and this is because, and this was built again as a streetcar tunnel because, look, this is 28 meters above sea level, and if you go here, you'll see it's even more. It's 36, maybe, 34, and then here it is at sea level. It's, I think this is the lower portal. It's just, it was originally to, or maybe here actually, it says tunnel. It's to bypass these. It's to bypass these grades, to the point that I once got caught by a cop walking in the tunnel when the buses were not running, just because I didn't feel like climbing the very steep grades that you get between North Main, Benefit, and Prospect. Cops saw that I was not wanted for anything, and I did not have anything, incriminating in my book bag. I had a laptop, not graffiti, and let me go. And so, now here's the thing: nobody thinks of this as BRT. I will talk about the buses in a moment. And so these buses in Providence, they're not commonly ridden by large numbers of people who are out of poverty, who are above poverty. Like, bus ridership in Providence is very low income, visibly very low income. The standards of service are consequently very low. Now, there are people at RIPTA who are trying to change that and make them better, but this is not thought of as the BRT. At one point, they tried to install fake trolleys in Providence, I think 91 and 92, just to kind of attract people to mass transit, but it was just a gimmick. At no point, so the problem with this American definition of BRT is that it's never based on standards, or else this would be clearly marked as BRT. Instead, it's, hey, middle class people who think that the bus is all creeps and weirdos. We all agree that the buses are full of creeps and weirdos, but this bus is different. This is essentially American BRT in a nutshell. Now, it does generally involve higher standards than other buses, but its higher standards are always defined locally. So in New York City, these standards center off-board fare collection. You can dip your Metro card at the bus stop rather than on the bus. Note that you cannot do so on the bus. It's not that you're optionally allowed to do it before you board, and then if you didn't have time, then you do it on the bus. You're not allowed to do that. I actually fake fare dodged once because the bus was not very frequent. The bus I was riding on Main Street in Queens was not very frequent. I had a valid monthly. This being New York, valid monthlies are not actually valid fare media, unless you've actually paid on the bus with them or again at the bus stop. I just know that people don't really check buses anymore. This is a problem with BRT, and this is a problem for which the current head of the MTA, General Lieber, I think he bears personal responsibility for this. The plan, when Byford was running New York City Transit, were to make the entire city go off-board fare collection with Omni, and essentially these plans I don't think they're officially canceled, but they're unofficially canceled, and my understanding is that this is specifically General Lieber just not being very interested in this. So this is okay. Now there is fundamental I'm sorry. I used to ride it a little bit before and now after, and yeah, it's bad. Yeah, there is a fundamental quality difference in the ride quality, and it's not just the EU. I've heard the same out of Sydney. So in Australia, it's apparently as in Europe. The buses are painful to ride. It's a pan US and perhaps pan US and Canada problem. The buses are noticeably less comfortable to ride. Yeah, they've installed everything, and now they're not doing it. And again, General Lieber decided it will not happen. It will happen. It will happen if and when General Lieber is removed from his position. It will not cost him anything to implement. It will actually cost him negative to implement off-board fare collection because the buses would run faster, and therefore not only so they would run faster. So off-board. So let's for a sec talk about the benefits of off-board fare collection because that's important. Bear in mind, San Francisco has done that. So what counts as SBS in New York in San Francisco is literally any bus that makes limited stops. They don't think of these buses as BRT because it's all relative to local standards. So let's for a sec recount the benefits of off-board fare collection. This is something that they can't be much worse than a third-tier UK city suburban bus. You will be surprised. So the benefits of off-board fare collection. Now, to be clear, when I say off-board fare collection, I am defining it as you can board the bus without paying at the front door before the bus departs. So, for example, in Vancouver, you are allowed to pay at the front if you don't have a valid ticket. I did not have a monthly ticket in Vancouver because, as I mentioned, I didn't go to the office very much and I didn't travel around the city often enough to justify a monthly. So I would so I would buy tickets in booklets and I would dip them one at a time. So so whenever I rode those buses, the BRT, the 99B line, I either boarded front or if there was no much of a line, I boarded back and then walked through the front. Now, if I had a valid transfer, I didn't need to do that. This is also, I think in Singapore at one point they were trying to do that, but at this point I think you just board at front and tap Easy Link. Now, in Berlin, if you have a valid monthly, you board and you don't need to show anything to anyone. Again, it's the same in Vancouver on the buses that do have off-board fare collection. I don't remember if there's a fare box on the bus because in Berlin I've been on the bus so infrequently that I didn't need to think about it ever. On the trams, there is a fare box. You can buy a ticket on the tram. But again, nearly everyone is on monthlies. In Zurich, there is a ticket at every a ticketing machine at every tram stop and every bus stop. Oh, there is in Berlin. Okay, thanks. So, what are the advantages of this system as I'm describing it? First of all, people don't need to queue at one door when they board the bus. Therefore, they board faster. It's only on trams. Okay. So first of all, people can board faster because they can board from all doors. All door boarding is often used as a synonym for off-board fare collection because it is it's probably the most significant benefit. Equally significant is that I don't know if it's significant. Almost as significant is that people don't need to queue and dip the card the Metro card, before the bus can move. So even if you have proof of payment with onboard fare collection, where maybe there's a ticketing machine, a little one, or a tapping station at every door of the bus, that's still even if you can only pay on board and not at the bus stops, the bus still does not wait for you to dip before it moves. This means that there's less queuing. This also means that if there are more passengers at the bus stop than expected, it will not delay the bus. This is very important because um, the because bus service is chaotic. Um, okay. I should at some point look at these papers. Uh, but I mean this. This is not very advanced math. Um, but so this is a blog post from 4.5 years ago where I talk about where I talk about this using the language of dynamics and chaos theory. Um, and I don't mean nonlinear equations or strange attractors. Well, this is kind of nonlinear when you squint your eyes, and there are certainly no strange attractors there. Remember, I have published papers in serious math journals about dynamics, and I can vaguely define a strange attractor to you. I've never used them. They are very strange. Nonlinear equations everyone uses all the time. For people who only know about chaos from Jurassic Park. But anyway, the issue is that for a bus to be on schedule is an unstable equilibrium. The mechanism is that if the bus runs slightly behind schedule, then more people are going to wait at the bus stop, right? And let's say the bus is supposed to come every 5 minutes and it's delayed by a minute, then people will have had 6 minutes to show up at the bus stop and not 5, so 20% more. These people are going to take time to board the bus. Therefore, the bus will go further behind schedule. Likewise, if it is ahead of schedule, fewer people will show up, and the bus will go further ahead of schedule. If you have off-board fare collection, or again on board where the bus will just start moving before you dip your card because it's a proof of purchase system, and it's expected that you can tap a minute later, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you've paid. Then in that case, not only do people board faster, but also the impact of the number of riders on the stop time at the bus stop is not unfortunately eliminated, but it is fortunately reduced. Thus, the mechanism that makes buses unstable to the point that they bunch, that mechanism is still there, but it is attenuated. It will take the bus longer to go completely off schedule. Fewer active control resources with dispatching, with conditional signals. In the days you have traffic signals that give the bus a green wave if it's behind schedule, but don't give it any priority if it's on schedule. So you need fewer of these resources to keep the bus on schedule. So off-board fare collection, again, speeds up the bus, makes the bus more reliable. Also, importantly, if you don't have off-board fare collection and the bus driver is expected to enforce the fare, the bus driver is not trained at enforcement, and a dedicated criminal will threaten violence, sometimes even commit actual completed violence. To be very clear, when I say completed violence, I shouldn't use that expression. It's legalese. Completed means as opposed to attempted or threatened. So if someone attempts to punch me and they miss, they have committed assault. It is an attempted crime and not a completed crime. If they've threatened to punch me but have not done so, this is a threat. This is still a violent crime, but it is not a completed assault. If they actually punch me and they hit, that is a completed assault. There are assaults on bus drivers in New York. The unions are big supporters of off-board collection so that the bus drivers themselves will not need to enforce the fares. So this is another advantage. All of these led the last very good leader of New York City Transit, Andy Byford, to try to accelerate full off-board fare collection. And more recently, this has stalled. The current head of the MTA, Janno Lieber, is not competent enough to be interested. He's not competent in either operations or in capital construction, which is his background. Yeah, there's a little stop sign. The issue is that specifically sometimes European buses stay in the fast lane as opposed to the curb lane. So when the bus stops, it's a tram thing also. When the tram stays in the fast lane, uh, because people can board the tram from any door, they have to cross a lane of traffic. So there's a stop sign that forbids cars to pass the tram. This being Berlin on the right, where Britain would be on the left. Um, I think in San Francisco they have that rule as well on the surface sections of Muni Metro. Uh, by the way, for the record, I say thanks to the driver in New York or in Vancouver. I would say that uh, without the onboard fare collection. Just when I get off, I say thanks or danke. Um, oh wow, yeah. So, um, at any rate, okay, New York doesn't have off-board fare collection, but again, I got used to it. Remember, I don't ride buses very much. The last time I rode buses regularly was in Vancouver, and those buses did not have off-board fare collection because the Broadway buses do, but the Fourth Avenue buses, they don't. And I rode the Fourth Avenue buses. Um, so how do I perceive New York? First of all, as I mentioned, the trains are not very frequent and they're not very reliable. Oh, right. I can't click links from OBS because reasons. No, no. This is. Let's just do this maybe. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, you mean the no entrance sign where you're supposed to? Yeah, I've seen this elsewhere. This is not a good idea. Um, So anyway, the trains are not very frequent. They're not reliable. There are these the weekend service changes keep creeping. Like it's something that I got used to when I lived in the city, 06 to 11, and then maybe I forgot about it because maybe I would visit more weekdays. I don't remember. Maybe I would. Maybe I just got used to to that. I don't think it ever happens in Vancouver or Stockholm or Paris. The weekend service changes in Berlin. It does, but it's much less intense than in New York. Uh, and usually they try to make sure there's an all rail alternative, even if the all rail alternative is less frequent. Sometimes you have 15-minute frequencies. Just to put things in perspective, the interruption frequency in Berlin every 15 minutes um, is almost as good as the nominal normal frequency in New York on weekends and often in the weekday off peak, which is again 12 minutes, uh, and often comparable to the frequency in practice because in New York they do have very low reliability of these. Yeah, the after hour subway service is kind of shit. And now in Berlin again, it's not the best either. In the evening, it drops to every 10 minutes. I think maybe after 9 o'clock, which is not good. On the U-Bahn, in Paris, it would have been every 5 or every 7 minutes. Even at 11 at night. Yeah, there are a couple places in Berlin that with 20-minute service, but on the U-Bahn, I don't think that ever exists. Yeah, I guess there's U4 with its lower frequency, but U4 might as well not exist. Um, yeah, exactly. And so it's not about fast track bus substitution. The maintenance productivity in New York has deteriorated. Um, a lot of it is surplus extraction. People get used to something, and then someone makes up a new safety rule that says, "Oh, now we need to claw back service quality even more because safety." And somehow they don't ever. So the New Yorkers never benchmark themselves to other cities. Maybe London. It's actually a really frustrating thing, where you see this with the MTA reaction to our benchmarking them, and even some media reaction, and people who I generally think highly of in the media ask me about comparisons with London and Paris, and I've been explaining over and over that the best comparison for construction costs in New York um, for, let's say, subway stations is not actually London or Paris. And it's not just because London is among the most expensive non-US cities to build subways in, because Paris is not. Paris is the global median. It's that London and Paris have rather small subway stations for rather small subway trains for their size. So actually, in Stockholm, even though Stockholm is a much smaller city, its train platforms are longer than those of Paris and London. They're almost as long as those of New York. And so so I kind of am pushing back on this. New York should never learn from little people, because the little people are just infinitely better than New York on matters like running trains, or building trains, or running buses, or integrating these various things. I guess part of the issue is also because I'm more familiar with Europe now. I see more precisely where New York falls short. So again, reliability is a big one. By far the worst. The trains are not very fast. It's kind of ridiculous that the trains in New York are as slow as they are. Yeah, they make many stops, but in Berlin they also make many stops, and there are no express trains. And yet the average speed of the U-Bahn in Berlin is about 30 kilometers an hour. It's maybe a kilometer to an hour faster than in New York, with a stop spacing that's slightly wider than that of New York City Transit locals. And again, there are no express trains where I live. If you want express service, you ride the S-Bahn. Even the S-Bahn is less express than the New York City subway express trains. So the maintenance, so they just are not, they just don't think a lot in terms of providing good service. So every time someone makes a suggestion that is treated as a requirement, they don't push back. So the flagging rules. So flagging rules in this context mean that when you do maintenance work on one track, the adjacent tracks to it are under flagging rules so that the trains don't run over the workers. Of course, the actual track where work is happening has no trains, but on adjacent track, the trains are going to be slowed down, and the rules for how slowed down they are, and also how little work can be done while the train is passing, they've gotten tighter over time. So they keep saying that because of maintenance reasons, they can't run the trains more often than every 12 minutes or every 10 minutes on weekends, but they ran them every 6 to 8, maybe not every 6, but certainly every 8 minutes, 15 years ago, as late as in the 2000s, and not just the early 2000s either. They're capable of doing so. They just have these rules that they treat as sacrosanct, even though they absolutely are not, and are not typically used elsewhere, which again, the MTA does not benchmark itself to other people, except maybe again London, and that's because New York elite is familiar to some extent with London elite. They're unfamiliar with Italian, Swedish, German, Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese elite, barely with French elite. Just the sort of work pipelines. I mean, the sort of so if you're, let's say you are teaching in Germany. Let's say you're a teacher. Is the weight of New York City subway train a factor? No. There's also this. TfL and RATP have also pushed the envelope on TPH count. So the thing is, the safety in America on American rail is bullshit. Their safety is so much lower than where, for example, you and I live, Steffi, and we both know that Eschede exists. Eschede existed, I guess, more than 20 years ago. We both know that Germany is still far short of, let's say, Japan. But in New York, they never benchmark themselves to Japan because they look down on the Japanese. The New York elites out-earn their non-Anglo counterparts by a very large margin. It's a combo of wealth and inequality. They will not learn unless forced to. This is a big problem. It's one of those reasons you have this kind of incuriosity. In Britain, the safety is very good. But in the United States, it isn't. And they don't bother to learn from others. So in the same way that in Germany, let's say you're a teacher. I don't think you force them, I think you fire them, but or at least the top ones. But in Germany, let's say you're a teacher at a vocational school. Okay, you teach at I don't know, at a Realschule, and you essentially teach a prep course for a for some kind of vocational path. Yeah, me too. But I think they're slowly getting better, but that's mostly Medon having thankfully moved on to screwing over RGD. Which you not call RGD, but RGD, I guess. But so that kind of teacher that I mentioned who teaches vocational school in Germany is basically unemployable in, let's say, the United States because the United States does not have that kind of vocational education. Right? I mean, so that teacher in Germany could, if they picked up another language, move to a country with a compatible system of vocational education. I don't know enough to know which European countries they could move to. I think the Netherlands is very similar if this teacher spoke Dutch. I don't know whether they're employable in, say, France. They are not going to be employable in Britain. Yeah, Jano, never mind, listen, none of them have read more than, like, parts of the executive summary. And in the same manner, a generic Anglo-American overclass person who jumps between departments and is very generalist, works for the government but is not meaningfully a civil servant, or if they are, they're a civil servant in the same way that Sir Humphrey from Yes Minister is. That person does not. It's a job that does not exist in Germany. It's a job that does not exist in Sweden or in Italy, barely in France. Germany does not have an overclass. In Germany, if you want a political chief of staff to the minister, that person is called the parliamentary secretary, and that person is a member of parliament. Yeah, okay. But, so, because of that, they don't learn. And this is a more institutional problem. And again, it's something that I'm not going to say it's an observation that I have from New York. Yes, it is an observation that I have from New York, but it is an observation about how the MTA has been how it's been reacting to the transit cost project. And but in New York, as a user, as I said, I mean, I can say as a very informed person about the specifics of public transit, someone who learns from people who are very informed as well about specifics like maintenance, where I'm not as fluent, but for example, Uday Schultz, aka Home Signal blog, this person, not Single, fuck Jesse Single, or rather don't fuck Jesse Single. Home Signal blog, this one, so Uday is extraordinarily informed on issues of operations and maintenance. So I hear from him, I hear from other people who are informed. I have enough technical grounding and enough grounding in this issue that I can maybe not know as much as Uday and others do, but ask good questions around them, for example. And I can tell you that this is because of these maintenance slowdowns that the trains are unreliable. But as a user, what I see is unreliability. I see poor frequency. Now the other thing that I see, so I mentioned so far service issues, frequency, speeds are not very good, poor reliability. But now what I'm noticing is also the distractions, and these have gotten worse. So what do I mean by distractions? In Berlin, or in France, in Paris. Have I taken trains in France outside Paris? Yes, but only TERS. I don't think I've even ridden the Nice Light Rail. Or TGV. So in Paris, in Berlin, in München, in Stockholm, I think also anything in London, when you ride the train, there are going to be announcements, typically automated, that will say, this is, for example, and I'm going to give the New York script, not the, let's say, Berlin script. The New York script is something like, This is 21st Queensbridge, Jamaica bound F. Next stop is Roosevelt, Jackson Heights. Stand clear of the closing doors. That is the script in New York for the stations. It's fine script. No objections there. The problem is everything else that they say, because from time to time they will play these automated announcements like, if you see something, if you see a suspicious package, tell an MTA employee or a police officer, or a crowded train is no excuse for unwanted touch. And then again, tell an MTA employee or a police officer if you've been sexually molested, because the police is famous for how pleasantly it treats victims of domestic and sexual violence. In fact, ask every person, every advocate for sexual assault survivors, what they will tell you is always, the police is amazing. We admire the police. You should quintuple the wages of all the cops, just for thanks. And then or there's the stuff that they've added. I think they added it last year. NYPD cops are on this platform. Do not hesitate to approach them with questions or with problems. I think this is a script that, I don't remember if the script was even here a year ago when I was visiting. It was certainly here in October. I think it was added in the summer because people were complaining about subway crime, and either NYPD or subway or transit police, they demanded this. Essentially, they demanded this script because they said it's important for public safety. Oh, your bags may be searched and checked by police at any time. Yeah, exactly. And, yeah, exactly. I mean, I will say that, yeah, a very large fraction of cops know victims of domestic violence intimately. Right? I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's 40%. I don't remember the statistics. You probably remember them better than me. Yeah, a very large fraction of cops, in fact, are married to victims of spousal abuse. And the and so the so it's kind of like how in an authoritarian state they like putting the leader's picture everywhere. I mean, in Berlin, I don't think I've ever seen a poster with Olaf Scholz's. Yeah, exactly. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of Olaf Scholz's face, or of the apparently, unfortunately, re-elected Mayor Giffey's face, except during election campaigns, and election campaigns are a couple of weeks. So yeah, I've seen Olaf Scholz's face because he was on all of the SPD election posters a year and a half ago, and now he's Kanzler, and he no longer is. Because his job is to run the country, not to have his face on every poster. This is not how it works in authoritarian countries, and this is not just modern authoritarian countries. It goes back even to the Roman Empire. The Roman emperors loved putting their face on everything, on coins. And then medieval and early modern kings would put their faces everywhere, including on coins. And this is, in the French Revolution, it's said to be how Louis XVI was caught while trying to escape France for Belgium. His face was so familiar to the public from coins that someone at an inn that someone at an inn recognized him and called the revolutionary equivalent of the cops on him and on Marie Antoinette and the rest of that group. Yeah, and useless monarchies, sure, but at this point, there's a monarch whose job is to have his face on the coinage, and even then, you don't actually see King Charles' face on every street corner in London. You do see Assad's face at every corner in Damascus and everywhere else in the regime-held parts of Syria. I mean, yeah, Charles is useless, whereas Assad is negatively useful. And so so I bring this up because this is what I this is where my mind wanders to when I keep seeing this constant police, police, police messaging in New York. And this is something that has gotten worse recently. It was not like this before Corona. I can't tell whether it's Adams or a Corona climate in which people suddenly decided that you show your seriousness by supporting the cops, especially when they're being criticized for brutality, and or whatever. But they constantly hit you in the face with the fact that there's very visible police presence, which is, I guess, supposed to make people feel safer, but it doesn't make everyone feel safer. And I'm not even saying this is someone who cops will naturally hit or something, or naturally brutalize or something. More cop just feels whatever. I don't care. Like, I mean, usually my experience of the cops is they're kind of useless whenever I need something from them. Like when I need, let's say, when I lose a passport, or when a friend in Berlin gets their purse stolen. And they keep hitting you with this, and all of this is something that reduces safety in many ways, because it teaches people to tune out all the messages. So if there's an actually important message about safety, people will tune it out. There were several murders. Yes, there were several murders, but not enough to the point that the media started covering issues that were not actually murder as if they were murder. Most of the people who die by falling onto the tracks and getting run over in New York are either death by suicide or by accident. Some of them are murder, but very few. So the solutions should center the ones that are accidental or suicides. So this means platform edge doors. The reaction of the MTA to that suggestion has been to stonewall and make up excuses why it is not possible. So no, it's not about the murders. It's about the murders are an excuse. And so it's just distracting to constantly have these PSAs play one after the other. Sometimes the entire trip between two stations, if they're, let's say it's a local train, so it's a local stop interval. Sometimes that entire trip between two stations is going to be to adjacent stations is going to be PSAs, and at one point there were so many PSAs that there was not enough time for the full announcement of the station, which was cut off. These PSAs also would distract passengers. Passengers do learn to tune them out, in addition to just constantly agitating passengers with noise. The trains are generally noisier here than they are in Berlin or Paris. And just as a reminder, the minimum curve radius on the IRT, on the numbered lines in New York, is the same as on Metro Line 1 in Paris. And so so there's just more squeal. I don't quite know why. In Berlin, there's one section in Berlin where there's squeal, which is parts of the north-south tunnel of the S-Bahn, and the central sections, one of the central sections of it. I don't remember. It's somewhere between Potsdamer Platz and Oranienstrasse. Oranienburgstrasse. Oranienstrasse is elsewhere. I just don't remember which of these interstations. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. London is also square. Yeah, because in Paris I don't remember square. And yeah, Metro 1 is with rubber tires, which reduce squeal, but even the steel. But I rode enough steel-wheeled lines. I don't remember squeal. Or very little squeal. New York has much more squeal. Just the trains maybe rattle more or something, and the constant PSAs. Again, people learn to tune them out. This is especially important for people who don't speak English very well. I've had these conversations with some people who maybe didn't speak the language, because in Berlin it's very easy to find people who don't speak the language very well. This is the experience of nearly every person who has just moved to Berlin. And yeah, one of the things that they've said is The constant PSAs teach people to tune out even the important things, uh, because they just because it requires much more mental energy to try to understand what is being said. And of course, this is especially true in New York, where because of the train noise, because of somewhat jank uh, automated announcements, and because of even jankier manual announcements by the conductors themselves on the older trains, or even on the newer trains when the announcement is not something that is in the automated system script. It does require much more effort to try to understand what is being said. Um, yeah, okay. London has just. You're right. I try to avoid. So I especially try to avoid that section in the summer, and the reason I try to avoid it, especially in the summer, is that then the windows are open. In the winter, there's squeal, but there's less. Now, reminder: this is America. This is not Europe. People here have air conditioning. The subway cars are supposed to be air conditioned. They don't need to ever be open. They don't need to ever. They don't need to ever squeal, and yet they do. Yeah, and so the PSA might be on outages or coming trains, but if it's a struggle to understand what is being said, it's very easy to tune it out. Um, so it's just a very distracting experience. It's there's so I did talk about this on Twitter a couple of months ago before I stopped using Twitter with Sarah Meyer, who was, I think, in charge of customer service at the time, and she explained that it was that people demanded certain things and she was not empowered to push back. So yeah, she could say don't do as much PSAing, but the cops insisted this is really important, and essentially nobody has ever told NYPD that sometimes other people are allowed to make demands of them, and it's not, and that NYPD is not the collective monarch of New York City. Um, and yeah, exactly. The manual announcements are not. I usually understand them on the train, and I never understand them at the station. Um, you hear how I speak English. Um, yeah, now imagine people who don't speak English as well as I do. Oh, you mean Mayor Adams? No, I don't think Mayor Adams. Oh, what I was told was specific is what it did not come from the mayor. A lot of the annoying PSAs they come from safety and police people who thought that see something, say something is an important thing to say. This is before Adams. I don't remember if Adams made it worse or if it got worse due to post BLM backlash from 2020. But it was the stuff that that I'm describing about the difficulty of pushing back predates that. So again, these are not people who think ever about the customers. The managers don't usually use the trains, and if they do, they use them only at rush hour. Remember, it was viewed as weird that Andy Byford did not drive. I don't think he knows how to drive. If he does, he certainly never drove while in New York. Um, yeah, Yeah, it's kind of visible policing on the theory that that makes people feel safe, and it's the exact opposite because it tells people that there's a big crime problem that the cops are solving. The problem is, and then people see the cops not do anything. Like, the cops are not, like, people don't see the cops work, they see the cops loiter, is the problem. Um, and meanwhile, it broadcasts to people that this is very dangerous. Just to put things in perspective, there are people who will object to having their uh, area declared a Superfund zone. Yeah, exactly. Who will object to their area being declared a Superfund zone, uh, because maybe they don't think that it will help them in any way if the environment, if maybe they don't trust environmental remediation, then they can get stuffed, or maybe there actually isn't environmental remediation. But they are worried that the statement that this area is contaminated will reduce property values. So a lot of it is just it kind of broadcasts to people this is a dangerous city, this is a dangerous systems. Don't do that. It's people who are themselves scared of the plebs. They assume everyone else is also scared of the plebs, and they constantly scare everyone of the plebs. This is the New York of now. And yeah, it does require changes. Changes that someone is going to need to tell the mayor, for example, if the MTA is a state agency. But I mean, that's the problem. So the trains are not very frequent. They're not reliable. They're very noisy. The PSAs are constantly annoying, and there's constant people hitting you on the head with cops, police. These people don't dog food. That's the whole thing. If you tell them these people, it's kind of annoying because you would think that in a country run by generic managers would understand concepts like dog fooding, bike shedding, but they don't either. Maybe I imagine in the private sector they do, but not the ones who ever descend on the public sector. Just to be very abstract, I guess the issue is that let's recount the various more competently run places from which people might go to American public sector management. So there's the American private sector, right? The American private sector is run by generalists, not specialists, and it is a problem. Although the tech industry and the biotech industry are not. They are generally run by people who the tech industry, all of the biggest tech titans, with the exception of Jeff Bezos, coded. Facebook is run by Mark Zuckerberg, not by the Winklevoss twins or by Eduardo Saverin. Likewise, the biotech firms are run by people in the field, by PhD level scientists, doctors, and okay. So at any rate, in the private sector, let's say the generic private sector, and for a moment, they still understand what dog fooding is because they've read management books about Microsoft, and they know what bike shedding is. The real crime problem, it's not PTSD, these people are not that old. It's social memory, it's not even correct social memory. Like, New York is not getting cheaper. New York is getting more expensive. The people leaving New York are working class. There was like a one-time change in which working from home did make some middle-class people who never liked the city and avoided its institutions, including the subway. Anyway, they just made them white flee for good. But remember, at this ridership is steadily getting back to normal. I mean, it's slow, but I think it's something like 80% at this point of normal. So it's mostly just people who for some reason the only people who have their ears are people who hate the city and don't use its public services. And yeah, part of it is that it's this kind of ideology that you only use public services if you're poor, if you're too poor to go private school, for example. But anyway, so I keep talking about this generalist culture, and again, American private sector management is generalist. This is a problem, but they're better generalists than the generalists of the public sector. Now, why would a CEO of a large American company ever run a public sector outfit? Why would they? It's not a stepping stone usually, unless they're trying to run for office. And if they're trying to run for office, they usually will just run for office as business leaders and write themselves a check like Mitt Romney did. It's not about their career in the same field, because usually the public sector does different things from the private sector. It's not going to give them prestige. No, these are generalists. They bounce between industries, but the public sector does not have sufficient prestige for them to be able to list it on their CV unless they're doing a big turnaround, and they probably understand that it's very unlikely that they will be able to do so. So why would they do that? And now what about other countries? I mean, why aren't there many Bifords trying to come to America? America does pay them better. Okay, the United States pays way higher wages than every other democracy. Even Britain, to some extent. Even Byford, remember, for Byford, New York was a stepping stone between Toronto and London. But the thing is, nobody, certainly in a country that doesn't worship the United States, and most of the developed world does not worship the United States, they don't think of the United States as a step up. It's, for example, can New York even hire the head of RATP? No. Why the fuck? RATP is a bigger agency. More people ride trains in Paris than in New York. And yeah, no, it's not all RATP, it's also SNCF. I mean, you could be, if you're the politically appointed head of RATP, you want to be prime minister of France, which is literally Elizabeth Borne. Okay, I'm not making something up. Elizabeth Borne literally went from I think advisor to I think she was attached to Ségolène Royal. She was then appointed politically to be the head of RATP. She did a good job. She's a technocrat. Um, Later, she became I think it was Minister of Transport early on under Macron, and then Macron made her prime minister, kind of to signify that he's not that right wing, that there are people in his cabinet in important positions who are not Bruno Le Maire and Gérald Darmanin. So, um, time spent in the United States does not count toward your political career in Europe. Forget about it. So the point is that the people who are the overclass in the public sector in the United States, at that level, they're negatively selected. Maybe they're turnaround experts who are bad at their job. This was Luis Ramirez, who Charlie Baker inflicted on the MBTA for a couple of years. He was a failed turnaround expert and then failed at the MBTA. So it's people who don't even understand management things about the importance of dog fooding, things about bike shedding, things about how to move fast. People are kind of looking down on Facebook's mentality of move fast and break things nowadays, just because the metaverse version of Meta is just so stupid. But people do understand, I think, the importance of being fast. And then you look at the public sector, and it's all dogma that the slower you are, the more legitimacy you will get. And then, meanwhile, every actual user of the system you don't get to talk to thinks that the state is too slow to ever help them and hates the state as a result. And so the upshot is that in New York, the people managing the subway are generally, at the very top politically appointed level, they're selected for being bad at their jobs. Facebook, I don't think Facebook, yeah, I think people overly blame Facebook for this. Like Fox News predates Facebook. Racism predates Fox News. Nativism predates Fox News. Fox did create genocide in Myanmar. That was something that Facebook unambiguously did. All these tech firms are dog shit at interfacing with the non-English speaking world, especially the third world. But this is not something that anyone in the American public or private sector gives a shit about. Yeah, exactly. And so you can't be, so about building a legacy, on the contrary, I think that the political appointees do try to build legacies for themselves. They constantly try to fight fires, in their own words. Essentially, they're the sort of people who, when they arrive on scene, fires spontaneously erupt. It's certainly not their fault. So they and you see this with General Lieber and how he responded when he was asked a very reasonable question about a report on construction costs. He said 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 1 was before my time. He listed the names of governors who were involved in the decision making, because he doesn't think in terms of permanent agency. To the contrary, again, he tries to make the agency his own. He's just bad at it. And that, I don't want to say it's the ultimate reason, it's one of the factors. It's just, again, it's a bunch of people who are very incurious globally, which is very common in America, but they're also incurious about good management practices, because there's no prestige in doing that unless you're in or attached to politics, and then everyone looks down on you. I doubt that one of the big profitable firms is going to hire someone like that, someone with that background. I mean, they have their own insiders. They have people from other big profitable firms in the same or adjacent industries. So it's people who, it's kind of weird because the argument for generalism over specialization in America is to avoid siloing. But these people end up just being horrifically siloed because in practice, they're just not good enough to run, let's say, an auto firm or a tech firm. Um, Let alone something even more specialized like biotech, where I'm pretty sure you need a PhD in um, the relevant subject like chemistry, biology, or an MD to count. Um, oh, Jay Walder. No, Jay Walder is overclass. Jay Walder is overclass. Jay Walder is same part of UK, US, Hong Kong overclass, jumping between these cities. And yeah, it was slightly better than the rest, but that's not saying much. Like his actual management was kind of meh, and especially ignorant of non-English speaking practices because for him the world is U.S., U.K., and places that worship the elites of the U.S. and U.K., and which is very much not, let's say, Switzerland, Japan, South Korea, Sweden, the Netherlands, Spain. Um, it's not campaigning ability. None of these people ever gets elected. It's not like in your Westminster system or my slash our whatever you call parliamentary PR system, where the politicians themselves are mined for important jobs at the party. So the for example, the person whose job is to make up lies about the other parties is going to be usually a junior member of parliament, or maybe at this point the head of the party youth organization. It's the political chief of staff is a parliamentary secretary. The people running a political campaign, they tend to be more senior MDBs or MPs. It's not like that in the United States at all. Nobody is elected except the governor or legislators, but they're individually powerless. So essentially, that's the political problem here, but it's not just about construction. It leads to terrible operations as well. And you see, there's just a slow deterioration in service standards, deterioration in speed, deterioration in frequency, deterioration in reliability, deterioration in user experience. And yeah, this is essentially what I'm. Yeah, and so this is essentially what's going on. Um, this is, and again, things are. I want to say things aren't getting better, but things aren't getting better are not my impressions of New York as an outsider. They're my impressions of New York as someone in the field, right? It's not, oh, hi, I'm a European tourist. Please run the trains more frequently and more reliably, and maybe also remove the trash from the streets, and improve the drainage. The drainage in New York is terrible. This is not something that I noticed just now. It's something that I noticed on my just before Corona trip from end of 2019, which was one of the factors that made me decide not to move here. And then a few months later, Corona happened. 40,000 people died. They felt vindicated. Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to say that both countries can fix themselves by joining the EU, but I mean, the UK decided to leave because the EU occasionally had opinions that differed from those of the I think called ERG, right, European Research Group. But yeah, bear in mind the EU itself has certain problems. Essentially, like it governs, like EU level governance is very much not like member state level governance in many ways. It's very much nudge on do. But I think that's fixable. Anyway, I think I'm done with like what my observations are of the New York City subway. I'm not going to talk about observations about rent or something because I'm not renting on the open market. I'm staying in hotels, and I'm not actually noticing. I'm noticing an increase in hotel fares, but not enough for me to like be able to say much. Again, poor drainage, but I mean, like I think people in New York know what needs to be done. They just don't do it. I mean, we'll see what the incoming dictator of the United Kingdom, Keith, does on queer rights. He does not wish to inform his future subjects of what his plans are, as unaccountable monarch with 500 odd MPs. Oh! So in the tech industry, at least in the United States, this has actually changed for the worse very recently. The like anti-woke shit that the American tech firms have been engaging in. It started with like just higher levels of harassment of underrepresented minorities and women, but at this point, even like I won't say queer men, but I mean often the queers who drive this are trans women. Um, and even trans women who are like rationalists and like think that like maybe James Damore had a point. I mean, they're still trans women. Like the Judenrat, they died like everyone else. Um, and so at least in the United States, at least in the United States there has been very noticeable deterioration in the last 1 or 2 years. Like one of the reasons I left Twitter was that essentially any space that was not my own, and I would have counted Transit Twitter as my own, or very left wing, um, was a space where essentially I would get yelled at lol pronouns for existing. Like an example would be asked on I asked the R Street Institute, which is a very policy wonkish center right outfit, about ESG investment, just because a few years before I heard there had say how he used to be a climate change skeptic, but then seeing that insurance companies were refusing to insure vulnerable coastal floodplains, he reconsidered, and I wanted to ask like a follow up about whether what they think about ESG, and their social media person, Senator Shoshana, essentially responded like normally to my question. I mean, from her perspective, I'm a good neoliberal. Um, and then, but somewhere in her comments replied, "Lol, he has pronouns in bio about me." But, I mean, this is not something that. Remember, I came out 3 years ago. In the first year, it was fine. First year and a half, it was fine, and then it became terrible. Mostly last year. Um, yeah. Yeah. Nobody. I doubt. I mean, in America, like probably among your coworkers in America, nobody would act weird either. Um, but like the influencers at this point have like decided that like any visible queerness is like against like the will of the dictator for life. Um, Dictator for life can be like a founder or an imagined founder. And this is a problem, the deterioration in queer rights. Bear in mind, New York is still a city where there are gender neutral bathrooms at restaurants where there aren't in Berlin. It's just New York isn't America. It's the biggest problem. Like New York would be an amazing city in many ways, even as an Anglo city. New York has one really bad problem. It is in America. Often it's the worst of America on matters of construction costs. On operations, it's not. On operations, the horrific off-peak frequencies are not a New York problem, they're an America problem. The construction costs are an America problem, and within them, a New York problem. But so much of the shit is just because New York is not just an extremely solipsistic global city, but it's embedded in the most solipsistic country of all. Um, yeah, but I'm still annoyed that they don't have gender neutral bathrooms in public spaces in Berlin. Other things in Berlin are great, but the gender neutral bathrooms, the lack thereof, um, bothers me. I mean, some places have gender neutral bathrooms, but no. Yeah, but it's not that common. Anyway, do people have questions? Um, and by the way, I'm tempted to. I mean, I should poll people on my Discord, but I can talk more about rolling stock issues if you want to talk about if you want to talk about the RER rolling stock. Yeah, this is actually a cool example, and there is a New York angle there. It's not a purely Parisian problem, the bespoke rolling stock. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, yes, but that would not change things. Like, I mean, the separation between the state and Jersey. That's not it's annoying. That's not what makes the city solipsistic. That's not white. That's not white. Not white. It's not what makes America solipsistic. Um, it's just one specific commuting annoyance. Anyway, it was just an extended rant, I guess, as someone who is increasingly like not a New Yorker, like crashing in hotels, not with friends, things like that. Um, so, do people have costumes? And again, about the topic, not about RER rolling stock, because that could be the topic for next time. Again, I'm gonna ask in advance on Discord this time, but curious about this paper. Yeah. Yeah. No, I always go off topic. It's just like, as long as I'm done with as long as I'm done with with what I wanted to say, I'm fine. This paper makes me slightly sad because if I'd gotten a job if I'd gotten the NUS job, I probably would have either authored it years before or co-authored this one. Enjoying your time in New York? Yeah, I actually am. The quality of Chinese food in New York is so much better than anywhere in Europe. Is a thing. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. So speaking of Path, I have not ridden Path this trip, and I don't expect to. I think I rode Path. I don't remember if I used Path my previous trip. I used Path a few times a year ago. And it was, yeah, bad, like very infrequent. Um, Slow for the stop spacing. I remember a couple of years ago I took longer to get somewhere between New York Penn and I'm forgetting where in the city I was going. Just because I expected the speed between New York Penn and World Trade Center to be high, the average speed, just because there's so few stops in that section, and yeah. Oh, what would be the ideal type of rolling stock for the subway? Just normal, um, just normal rolling stock based on the modular products that the vendors make. For example, not the Electrostar, but the Movia. Um, which I guess at this point is not is Alstom Movia, so it's the same as the Metropolis. Um, so something like this, and I'm not saying you should buy Alstom. Obviously, you should shortlist Alstom. Maybe if Alstom has the best value proposal on a combo of quality and life cycle costs, never just acquisition costs, then you should buy them. But this or the equivalents from other vendors. Um, so again, modular products, essentially the same shit that they sell anyone else. So apparently, so bear in mind, R172 is supposed to, R79 is supposed to be a variant, but for example, Movias have open gangways and these ones don't. Just again, don't try to be fancy with a rolling stock. The vendor knows more than you do. Is really important to understand. It's if Alstom delivers lemons, buy Xamens or something. But again, buy their normal shit. Don't impose requirements on them that are different from what they make, because at some point you're specking out a car phone. The cell phones were like the 1990s that were only in your car, like the early 1990s, not 1999. When there was already SMS. Oh. Yeah, I'm not using Amtrak this trip either because the person I was planning to visit in Boston is instead going to come to New York. Yeah. Oh, also importantly, resist the protectionist temptation to demand that they build factories like you're just creating jobs for site work consultants. The actual moralized blue collar jobs being created are created at a hilariously expensive rate in the United States. I've seen 5-year jobs that pay working class wage, and I don't mean like unionized public sector $40 an hour plus benefits wages. I mean, 15 to $20 an hour with more like pedestrian benefits. So, I don't know, wages maybe 40K with benefits a bit more. Job lasts 4 or 5 years. Yeah, that job costs $1 million to create. Just, if you have that money to spend on people, just send them to college. Seriously, it's going to cost 1/4 as much, even at very high unsubsidized costs. More normal and subsidized costs, like 100K, I think, at a public American uni nowadays. Yeah. They'll be able to get a better job on their own. No, I don't think there's Paris syndrome on this at all. Remember, Americans don't ever perceive Europe as a place of production, only as a place of consumption. And this cascades to the line that constantly infuriates me. I think it's by Brent O'Darian, who's generally good about these things, but sometimes brain farts. The idea that, people visit, people like being tourists in these walkable cities. It disproves that walkable cities are great. First of all, no, they like being tourists in resorts. It doesn't mean you should rebuild your city to be like a resort. But second, people don't generally perceive the places they visit for tourism as real places. There's always a weirdness around them. If they want to import something, it's obsequious wait staff, which is obviously not available in Europe. It is available, for example, in Thailand. And this is where you get the sort of people who move to Thailand permanently just because they like how obsequious the wait staff is. You certainly don't have any kind of systematic, let's all go to Paris and learn. If it is, it's a junket by the execs. They never send a mid-level engineer or a junior engineer to Paris to see how RATP does things and then come back. Or anywhere in, let's say, Germany, Italy, Japan, and so on. They do it, by the way, internally. Japan has exchange programs with European railroads, and like European railroads have exchange programs with one another, but Americans don't do that. I don't think there's an actual reverse Paris syndrome on this. Usually, like, bear in mind, a lot of especially the more elite people, when they go on vacation to Paris, they often don't even ride the trains, or if they do, they're not going to be on the RER. So I don't think that thing actually exists at scale. I mean, maybe it exists for some reporters. But for example, I met Anna Ley in Berlin last year. Her reporting on New York is very good. Okay, on the New York City, on New York City Transit, her reporting is excellent, to be very clear. But at least I haven't seen anything that's visible, like that kind of journalism of hi, I went to Berlin and here's what I learned. So it's not, and again, this is someone who is almost definitionally not a solipsistic American. Let's start with the fact that she's a first and a half generation immigrant, and this absolutely informs her experience. And again, her coverage is very good. So in general, like I haven't seen this even among the reporters who I have seen visit Paris or Berlin a lot. I mean, I literally met someone who was in that exchange program and told me about their work in Russia and in Japan. Like, this does exist. Yeah, there are exclusive tech, rulebook, strategy things, but by the standards of like all the trolls who think that Houston needs 23 or however many platforms for not actually that much service, and therefore they need to spend billions of pounds on rebuilding the station, like, DB is not actually that solipsistic. Like, DB has problems. I think the place they most need to learn from that they aren't learning from is France, not SNCF, which is managerially not very well run, but France and its strategy and its LGV strategy. But did I just say LGV, like American L and then GV? LGV. And so they definitely should be learning more, but like comparing them with like American solipsism is a little bit like comparing a mugger with Adolf Hitler. I mean, yeah, you shouldn't mug people, but some, like, perspective. Um, anyway, are there other questions? Um, oh, yeah, I mean, bear in mind these are also a lot of the problems in the US. It's just the privatization of the state here has been very advanced, much more so than in Germany. Germany, remember, Germany is not actually that privatized by Northern European standards. It's the Nordic strategy about how to privatize the state specifically notes Germany and Switzerland as less privatized countries that should not be followed, and then they never ask, wait, Germany has a semi-functional high-speed rail network that costed $60 billion in 2022 prices to build. Britain is thinking one line would cost 120. Maybe we shouldn't imitate Britain. Maybe we should imitate Germany. They're not saying that. So this is not actually a giant problem in Germany. It's actually a much worse problem here, and especially in the United Kingdom. Because essentially Britain privatized the functioning state, whereas the United States is privatizing a state that never functioned. Have I ever taken a look at the Empire Corridor? Yes. But could you ask what about the Empire Corridor? Because a look at the Empire Corridor can mean a bunch of things. Have I looked at the study that was just released about New York to Buffalo medium speed rail service? I think they call it higher speed rail. Bullshit, it's medium speed. I think they want 90 miles an hour. Did I read that study? No, I read the older preliminary versions from the 2010s. Have I crayoned a little bit? Yes, I've crayoned New York to Albany. Have I looked at how it connects with regional rail? And the issue of Penn Station Access West. Penn Station Access being the connection. Okay, at this point I'm gonna reboot my crayon just because it's the easiest way to show it. Currently, the line currently colored red here, that's just an intercity line, and these stations don't exist. Some of them, Co-op City, Morrisburg, Barchester, Hunts Point, are being built, and I forget the timeline, but soon this will open as Metro North Line. It's called Penn Station Access because presently all the commuter trains go only to Grand Central, not Penn Station. Penn Station Access West is the line that is colored orange here. It's this line. This is also an Amtrak only line, much less Amtrak service because it is not the Northeast Corridor. I think at peak it's like maybe a train every hour. This requires, I think the original plan was to build 2 infill stations here and here. These are things I'm proposing. Likewise, this. Things I'm proposing, not stuff that is on the official plan, sadly. I don't actually know what this is. I think it's on the back burner. This, because again, the line currently only goes like this, to Grand Central. So I have looked at at some of the construction issues, within Midtown Manhattan. Yeah. So in Germany, the basic problem with so I will say, Germany's main problems with high-speed rail costs are scope creep, and the scope creep is political. It's not that the engineering is bad. The engineering is fine. Their unit costs are fine. They might even be better than France at this point because of certain very recent problems with France learning too much from Britain. But yeah, they just don't build enough in Germany. Oh, related to the Empire Corridor, would it be a good substitute? Oh, I imagine it would be very helpful. The problem is, the terrain makes this very difficult. So just because like all the stuff here that's green is just because it's elevation differences. So Dykeman Street is viable, but the center of the neighborhood is here. So is it a viable substitute? I don't know if it's a viable substitute. It's a viable addition, I would say. I mean, it's going to be a fight, for example, to do TOD here, especially because this is already, like, these are not tiny buildings. These are nulo tenements. These are pretty dense. So I guess what? Knock this down, build taller? Knock this down, build taller? I mean, viable, but again, not the most in the area. It's also not even right next to the station. Could you build like something right next to the station here? Maybe. Would be kind of isolated, and there is a freeway. So I don't want to say, oh, great, so if you do this and you don't need express trains on the A anymore and it's going to fully substitute. I don't think it will. It's an addition, though. Yeah, asking about the interlinear routes, yeah, but I mean, that's, yeah. Hire the Dutch. The construction costs in the Netherlands are not very good. And yeah, some of it is that the North-South line is in terrible geology, but the high-speed line, like HSS site is Zeit is not a very good project. You don't need a polder, just build on firm better. It's denser than Germany. The lot coverage is more than at a Euroblock. So the density here is probably about 25,000 people per square kilometer, and I think that includes the parkland. So this is an area that's denser than anything in urban Germany. Like, the buildings are bigger. I mean, some of them are even 10 floors and not 6. And not just the housing projects, it's just more densely built. Also, this is a working class area, so maybe more overcrowding, I'm not sure. Anyway, are there more questions? Okay. Because they don't want to, I imagine they sandbagged it. Like, a lot of the stuff that they think they need is bullshit. Again, I don't know this in as much detail as with the Northeast Corridor, but, like, the amount of bullshit that they were listing is extensive. Alright, thanks, thanks, Steffi. Anyway, if there are no more questions, I am gonna stop. Thank you all for watching what was a probably less focused stream than my average, and my average is already not very focused. So, thank you. I will see you, I imagine, on Saturday with a topic TBD. I'm gonna poll on Discord. And thank you. And if not, it's not. If it's not this Saturday, it's gonna be. I want to say Tuesday in a week, but I think Tuesday in a week I can't. So yeah, we'll see. So, thank you. Ciao, ciao.